So let's talk about what the issue is if you decide not to do this, right? If you decide not to follow your instincts. We started off talking about intuition and cognition here, and you can think yourself into and out of a lot of difficult problems. So I asked a friend about how is it that you deal with following your instinct? How do you have the bravery to follow your instinct? Especially, a lot of the people that are listening are going to be cerebrally minded, right? They're going to really, really enjoy using their brains to figure stuff out because they're inquisitive and curious and stuff. And tell me the story about a guy who was the editor of a newspaper, a very successful editor of a newspaper in England, and he decided that he was going to release a play about Prince Charles on the West End in London, and the entire thing was going to be done in rhyming couplets. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it wasn't very successful. It didn't even make it. I don't think it even finished first night. There was no one left in the audience, and half of the cast had gone home, apparently by halfway through. And he'd gone and asked this guy about, look, like, this is a bit of a wild, and he was dejected, right? He made this big song and dance about it, and he'd been promoting it and stuff, and it was a huge failure. And he asked him, so how is it that you're dealing with this problem, and he said, well, I followed my instincts. So, well, yeah, but I mean, we can see where your instincts have got you here. He said, yeah, your instincts may lead you wrong, but they're the only thing that's ever led you right.
Yeah.
And I thought, you motherfucker. That's really, really good. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's a price to pay for allowing your instinct to come through. Maybe you're going to put a bunch of trades on, and some of them are going to end up in a loss, but some of them are going to end up in a really, really big gain.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones that you need to be focusing on. And maybe, Nassim Taleb talks about this a lot. This is the whole point of his Black Swan events. He was prepared to be made to look stupid consistently in small amounts because he knew that he was going to win absolutely huge. Now, it's not quite to do with instinct, but it is the same sort of concept. If you're not careful, you'll dampen down the ability to hear that intuition, that aggregated subconscious speaking through, right?
Yeah.
And by following that, you're going to end up with egg on your face, with a play about Prince Charles in rhyming couplets and nobody in the audience and half the cast gone home. However, if you accept the fact that that's maybe a cost that you need to pay, in order to be able to follow your instinct, in order to be able to cultivate that and have faith in the fact that over the long run, if you aggregate it out over 10 or 20 years of trading in life, that you are going to end up in a significantly better place than you would have been. So maybe that's a price that you need to pay. The price that you need to pay for following your instinct is looking like an idiot sometimes, but winning big other times.
The place that instinct arises from, like, this is an interesting question as well. And I've thought about this in terms of savant syndrome, which for many people, we saw the movie Rain Man. Did you ever see the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman?
No.
It's an example, a Hollywood example of savant syndrome, where basically you could drop a series of toothpicks and the savant could actually calculate how many toothpicks were dropped. Now, this is not something that the conscious mind could do. Similar to the motorbike races on the Isle of Man. Like, you couldn't actually consciously decide what to do, but there's something in you that's calculating at a far greater level than your cognitive mind can calculate. And this is something that I think gives some substance to what instinct might be. Is just basically, it's the micro calculations that are happening through the entirety of your being, whether that's your consciousness, which is not localized to your brain, or whether it's the intelligence of your body, the whole neuronal network that your body is feeling in this kind of sense, or the interconnection to the field that can actually feel the energy of the field as we always can. And it's subtle. But I'd like to think of instinct as not some magical force, but as just the latent ability for us to make calculations at a far greater rate and a far higher efficiency than our cognitive mind can make. And that actually helps me trust my instincts, because I like to understand, like, well, why am I trusting my instincts anyways? And when I break it down to, all right, there's just micro calculations that are happening, as evidenced by real cases of savant syndrome where people are doing astonishing things without actually thinking about it, because they're tapped into that latent subconscious process, because part of their conscious mind is actually shut off, and it gives them this ability. And then I'm like, all right, so just trust that I'm calculating this far better than my mind is calculating it.
Here's the thing with that. You have to go through the first stages of Confucian training before you can do that. Mm-hmm. Because it's very easy to look at, I'm just going to follow my instinct, as if I'd done this 15 years ago as a 19-year-old kid, hang on, what instinct am I optimizing on here? Mm-hmm. I haven't aggregated enough experience to actually be able to have this. So I really do think, and this is the point I was making in the very beginning around the tension between cognition and intuition, you need to be very deliberate in the beginning. You have to understand where the steering wheel is and how to change gear and how to use the clutch, or not if you're in America, but you have to understand those things. Only after learning those very deliberately can you then do that on a racetrack whilst optimizing.
Because you're still training the calculator. The calculator is your subconscious mind. It is your inherent faculties, which still needs to be trained by the rigor of the discipline of going through the process of training. And then once it's trained, then it's calculating at a far higher level. It's the same with any sport.
Here's a good example. So I got back to my Airbnb after being in Guatemala for a couple of days, like nearly 2 weeks. And the first time that I stayed in the same place, Airbnb's absolutely having my pants down this year. First time I stayed in this place, my phone charger was in one location, but it was too close to my desk, and I was using my phone while I was at my desk. So when I came back in the beginning of March, I put it in a different location. Last night, when I got back in, I'd put it in location number 1. However, on the very, very evening, as I was about to go to bed, I found myself walking to location number 2. That was the one that was most recent. That was the one that I'd spent the most time in. And it made me think, hang on a second, my charger should be over here. This is the place that I optimized it for. I'd consciously plugged it into the wrong place. Location number 1, less optimal. And where did my body take me? It took me to the place that it knew was correct. Mm-hmm. I also have a friend who told me this story. So he was out in somewhere over in Asia. And he was always saying he's very, very attuned to his intuition, unbelievably so. And he's a quantitative trader. So he's like the most rational trader that you can. It's all algorithms, it's technology. And he was in this bar and they were sat, you can imagine those sort of sunken booths that you have in Asian bars where it's the floor and then the floor falls away into a circle and you sit with your legs into the floor of the circle and it's kind of the floor's padded and you sit around a circular table in the middle of it, right? So the floor is completely flat, table's flat, and then people sort of sit and their legs dangle over the sides. And he was there with a couple and his wife. And apparently his wife is familiar with him having a sense of something. And she sort of knows when it's bullshit and when it's not. And he got this really, really, really bad sense as he sat down with his friends. And it's a sort of a long, busy bar. He got this really, really bad sense. And he looks at his wife and he's like, honey, we need to get under the table. She's like, what do you mean? It's like, I'm telling you. And then immediately she went from, what do you mean, to, okay, deadpan. He tells the other 2 people, he says, when I tell you to get down, we need to get underneath the table. What? Imagine if one of your friends said that. They're not bought into his ability to tell these stories. And he's like, look at us. Like, I'm not fucking about. When I tell you, you need to get under the table. As he's saying that, someone picks up a bottle of vodka and cracks the waiter across the head with it. He says, get under now. Sure enough, the guy that he was with that cracked him across the head with it pulls an Uzi out of the inside of his coat and sprays the entire bar. These guys are underneath the floor, underneath this table.
Whoa.
Nobody was killed. One person was injured. And it turned out to be some like gangland, Yakuza on territory type stuff that had occurred. Uh-huh. And 20 seconds before it happened, he was like, something's going on here. And he was like, he's got 10 stories that have that showing there. You go, okay, what is it?
Well, to me, that makes sense is, again, talking about the connection to the field, right? Like, I strongly believe that, I tried to write a book called Master Your Mind, and what ended up breaking that book, got me to 60,000 words, and I had to scrap it twice, is that I could not adequately separate and contain the mind from the field or from the body. Like, you just can't, you can draw an imaginary line, but it's not real. Like, the mind and the body, of course, are so interwoven and inextricably woven together. Well, where's one start and where's one end? And then the field, which is the it's the energetics of what's actually happening, from like heart resonance to different things, even mirror neurons, even different ideas that exist, and all of these things that are happening in the field. And also potentially the cues that are happening from those people around, like that latent sense of violence that was imminent in the space, right? And we just don't have the right language and science and whatever to calculate that. But my stepfather was a SWAT team officer, has similar stories about he was supposed to go down this alley and he gets this intuition that he can't go down this alley. Someone was laying an ambush with a shotgun. Like, how? It's either completely magical or that you just trust the field. You trust that you're tapped into the field, and when there's something amiss in the field, you can feel it. Some part of you in your soul or in your spiritual sense can actually, which is connected to the field, the connected self, can feel what that is. So that's absolutely a part of our intuition. And potentially what the training that we need to take for that is to just train ourselves to listen. Because so many times, even like small things, I'll have weird feelings like, we have 2 cats, and I'll be like, should probably move that bottle off the counter. And then I'll be like, oh, fuck it. I'll go off and do my thing. And then Dink. Skibbity, pap, 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 crash. And I'm like, I fucking knew I should have moved that thing. But I've almost always know. Or it was like, recently I was stupid things like this. Obviously nothing with Uzis or shotguns. I'm not living that kind of life, thankfully. But like I was borrowing my wife's phone, and I was simultaneously moving a rock. I had no pockets, and I was borrowing her phone, heavy rock, right? And I was like, you should put the phone down. And I was like, nah, I got this. I can carry the phone and the rock. Like, don't worry about it. It was like, strong message, put the phone down. Well, of course, what ended up happening is I did succeed in carrying both the rock and the phone, except now her phone screen has a giant scratch on it from where the phone scratched up against the rock. And I think to myself, bro, like, you got a clear message that just put the fucking phone down. Of course, it ultimately doesn't matter. She'll get a new screen. No big deal, but it's annoying.
Yeah.
And these things happen. Of course, there's the big dramatic stories, like you said, but these things happen where we just have a sense of calculation of things that could either be from the field of what's going to happen. Maybe it's the cats that I'm feeling in the field, or maybe I don't fucking know, but it's worth trusting. That's the thing that I do know.